Hello, everyone. My name is Vinayak Hegde, and I'm the C2 in Residence at Microsoft for Startups. Welcome to welcome to this edition of uh, um, Startup Thursdays. And today's topic is we are going to talk about DevOps best practices. And the speaker today is Antony Prem. So Anthony is an Azure Technical Trainer at Microsoft, and he specialized in Azure Technical Infrastructure and applications. He's passionate about technologies, futurism, and solving complex business problems through emerging technologies. He keeps customers up for success by providing deep technical advisory, strategic consulting, and strategic consulting through his trainings. So with that, I hand over to Anthony. But just before that, I just want to know that tell you that if you have any questions, you can keep them putting them in the chat. So I'll try answering them, and also we'll be asking them to the speakers. As he actually goes through his presentation as well. So keep your questions coming and your comments coming, and we shall be answering them during the webinar. With that, I hand over to Anthony. So, Anthony, if you can share the presentation and you can start off with a short introduction.
Hi everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Antony Prem, Azure Technical Trainer at Microsoft. In the next 90 minutes, we are going to talk about the DevOps transformations. And I'm going to share some of the best practices that could help you on this transformation journey. The way I structured this presentation into 4 pieces. First, we are going to have an understanding of the importance of DevOps transformation. And we're also going to look at the high-level overview of the Azure DevOPS Services. Then we are going to look at the managing source control, how to configure the Azure pipeline. And then later, we are going to look at the deployment patterns, how you can leverage the deployment patterns and what are the use cases. Then finally, we are going to look at the security, all aspects of security, how you can incorporate the security elements into your DevOps practice. So that's the agenda for today. Let's get started. So let's talk about the importance of DevOps adoption. So if you look at the industry, the technologies has been continuously changing. And we all know that this is going to be transform everything that we do today. If you look back, if you want to install an application, we used to install it on the virtual machine that is either hosted on the private cloud or the data center. But then now it's more of multi-cloud architecture where customer can deploy their VMs on their respective cloud that they wanted to deploy. And if you look at your application architecture, all our existing applications are built on top of the monolith architecture. So monolith architecture is basically it's a single box where your application is installed. Now this is getting changed. In fact, now there is a huge amount of transformation is happening. All this existing monolith applications are getting converted towards the microservices based architecture, cloud native architecture, or the event driven architecture, where we start using the technologies like Azure Container Services, Azure Kubernetes Services, the serverless computing platform, Azure Function, and so on. And if you look at the access control, we heavily rely on the network focused. But then now the companies wants to talk to one another. My application wants to collaborate with your application through some APIs. So it's more of API driven, and also we pay a lot of attentions on the identity layer. So there is a need for transformation. There is a need for modernization, and there is a need for innovation since the whole ecosystem is changing. And this is some of the important points I just wanted to highlight. And if you look at your existing architecture, it's more of centralized architecture. But now in the modern world, it's going to be distributed architecture or loosely coupled architecture. And your operations team's focus area, it used to be on the infrastructure as well as the applications. But then now it's more of applications because the infrastructure responsibilities is offloaded to the cloud service provider. We don't have much to do on the infrastructure layer. So there is a transformation is happening in this space as well. Now, when it comes to teams management, let's say we used to have multiple teams and let's say operations teams, infrastructure team, development team, testing team, and we all work in silos. Let's say a development team, they works on silo. They don't know exactly what's happening on the infrastructure team. Now, this is also getting changed as part of this transformation. So we all work as a one team that is focused on the customer focus. Now, this is very important, the change management. Now, let's say we wanted to release a feature change, or let's say we wanted to release some bug fixing. We used to take a lot of time, at least it takes several weeks to a month's time to get the release done in the production. But then in the modern world, there is an expectation on demand. So if you think from the business perspective, the businesses always wants to stay ahead of competitors. So business wants to make a change and the IT is not ready. That's the reality. So there is a need for continuous delivery. So one of the key purpose of the DevOps is to accelerate the continuous delivery. So from business point of view, unreleased changes is considered as a risk and the released changes is considered as a value. So when business wants to make a release and the IT is not ready, that's the bottleneck, right? So the solution is continuous delivery. And the whole purpose of the continuous delivery is to reduce the cost and time and the risk of delivering incremental changes to the users. Now, the next question, how do we adopt the continuous delivery? How do I start from? How do I transform? So you need to think from three aspects. You need to think from people perspective, you need to think from process perspective, and the technologies perspective. Let's talk about the people transformation. So when I talk about the people transformation, we should understand how our teams are working as of today. So as of now, you must be having multiple teams, let's say development team, testing team, infrastructure team, operations team. But then we all work in a silo. For example, if the developer wants to deploy some application, infrastructure team, they don't have any idea what does that mean. Like, we just blindly get the applications and we just deploy it. But then this changes, or this mindset, this cultural changes is one of the key transformation that has to happen as part of the DevOps adoption. So we all work as a one team. So end of the day, DevOps word is originated from the development team and the operations team. So those two words combined and they work as a one team, which is the DevOps practice. So if you are building a DevOps practice, so you should be prepared for the people transformation. And eventually some of the benefits what you are going to gain. So you are basically bringing your people together and you can have a great collaboration team and you can continuously focus on the improvement. Now let's talk about the process transformation. So when it comes to process transformation, we should understand the software development life cycle. So it starts from the planning. So first we make a plan, then we make a necessary code building process, then we build a code, then we release the code, and then finally we deploy it in the application. So once it is deployed on the application, we continue to monitor the application. If there is any issues, we try to get the feedback from the applications. Then again, the whole process gets started. So in each stages, there are some processes that you have to adopt. Let's say when it comes to code management, you have to decide, what is your source control, who is going to access this application. Are you going to, implement any vulnerability checks on the source control system? So you need to define the series of processes involved as part of this pipelines. So the whole purpose of the process transformation is to bring the efficiency. It's going to eliminate the waste and you can deliver the great value. Now, when it comes to technology or when it comes to product transformation, so as we discussed, there are various stages. We have a planning phase, code, build, test, release, monitor. And in each stages, there are additional sub-stages. Now, in these stages, there are different tools is being used in the market, by the way. So if you look at the planning, Jira is there, Azure board is there. If you look at the code, there are multiple repository, let's say GitHub and Azure repo, GitLab, Bitbucket. So there are various tool sets. Now, customer A is not equal to customer B. So customer A may be using GitLab, customer B might be using GitHub. So you have to identify the right set of processes or right set of products which are in line with your application ecosystem. See, some customers might have a Java applications here, major presence on the Java application. Some customer might be using .NET based application ecosystem. So there are some tools well works with the Java, there are some tools well works with the .NET. So you need to understand what are the tool sets that you need, and you need to pick the right tool sets in your DevOps product. Now, what is DevOps? So DevOps is basically, it's the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery for your to accelerate your software deployment. So it is very clear that the companies who have adopted the DevOps practice, and they have attained the higher deployment rates, and they are going to the market very fast, but at the same time they have reduced the failure rates and they increased the revenue. And this is the fact that is released by the DORA. Okay, so now let's talk about the Azure DevOps, how Azure DevOps is going to help us here. So Azure DevOps is basically, it's the cloud-based service that contains multiple sub-services. So Azure DevOps primarily contains Azure Board, that's one of the service, and Azure Repo, that is act as a repository which can be used for the version control. Then there is a pipeline. Azure Pipeline basically helps you to automatically build and release your packages to the production. Then there is a test plan. You can use the test plan to automatically build the testing. You can also submit the test cases. You can publish the test results. So those are the things which you can do as part of the test plans. Then there is an artifact. Artifact is basically, there's a build management repository. See, when you are making a build to the when you are making a changes, you make a build and then you release it to the production. If you want to retain such builds, you can actually use the Azure artifact to store your build. Now, and also Azure does support some monitoring ecosystems such as Azure Monitor, Application Insights. And these tools, what it does, it's basically collects the telemetry data from your applications, and it can get the feedback. The feedback basically, it's the way to finding the opportunity to to find any performance issue or any runtime issue. Basically, these insights can gather the telemetry data and it can send it back to the Azure DevOps board. So when it comes to building your DevOps practices using Azure board, so you need to think from these lines. You first of all, we should know what are the different stages, and then each stages we have to see how we can leverage these tool sets. And I'm going to show some demo today, and where we are going to build some. I have a source code which we are going to publish it into the Azure deployment target. We have an app service platform, and we are going to use these services like a repo, board, pipelines, and so on. Okay. So there are some customers who have already invested on the DevOps. Probably you might have a GitHub, or you might have a GitLab, or you might have a Jenkins. So these are various tool sets. So some customers always ask me, I have my existing tool sets, so can I leverage Azure DevOps? So the answer is yes. So Azure DevOps is actually, it's a one centralized service. It can be a center of everything what you do, and you can integrate the necessary plugins wherever required. Let's say if you are using Jenkins, you can use it for the build. Let's say if you are using Jira, you can use it for the board. So, but then Azure DevOps service also provides the basic sub-services like a board, repo, pipeline, which is also can be used. All right. Now let's talk about. Let me just quickly show you what we are going to do as part of this demo. So I have a simple application. This is basically my retail application, and I have a source code which is on my local machine. And I'm going to publish this source code into the Azure repo. Azure repo is basically, it's the version control system which can be used to store the source code. And then as soon as I publish my source code, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a pipeline. So pipeline is basically, it helps you to automate your build. So what we are going to do basically, as soon as we make any changes on the source code, the build is automatically going to be triggered, where we are going to use the DevOps services. And using the pipeline, we are going to integrate the repo and the deployment target. So this is my deployment target. So I have my existing web application, and this is my existing web application. And here, if you actually open this web application, it is just an empty application. So I don't have my applications code pushed so far. So let's say when I browse this, all you see is just a empty pages that comes from the Azure. And here I'm going to now publish my code here, and I'm going to publish it into the repo. Repo is going to further create the automate build, and eventually you will see this website. Let's say this is going to show my retail application. That's the short demo what I have. And later, once the application is built, it's ready, then you can use the feedback mechanisms. Let's say if you have some applications, if you have bugs in your applications, you can collect the feedback either automatically using the application insights, or you can manually, you can collect the feedback from the applications. There are several ways, which I'm going to talk about it later. All right, so I hope that's gave a very brief about the DevOps. Now what we will do, we will go ahead and perform a demo, and then I'll talk about the managing source control, pull request, and so on. Okay, so this is my source code. This is the stage number 1, have the source code ready, and I have the source code ready. And the stage 2, in fact, I have built my web application. This is already built as part of just a pre-work. Now the next task, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a DevOps project. So to create a DevOps project, what you can do, you can access the DevOps, dev.azure.com. So here you can create a project. Anyway, this is my demo project, which is just a as part of pre-work. I'm going to create a new project for this demo. So let's say today's 29 April demo. So here you have several work item processes, let's say basic, CMMI, Scrum, Agile. It depends on the kind of maturity model that you are going to follow. You can choose that. So let's say if your company is following Scrum practice, you can go for the Scrum practice, where you have the work item like features, release. You will get all such work items. And basic, you just get the basic work item. So I'm gonna create a basic work item. So once this is ready, we can publish our source code into the repo. Now this is the project. This is the Azure DevOps project which we just created, which is 29 April demo. And here you see the services, sub-services. You have a board, you have a repo, you have a pipeline, test plan, and so on. Now, the first step, we are going to publish our existing source code. Now this is our repository, and this is very similar to GitHub. Let's say if your company is following, let's say GitHub or Bitbucket, you can use your existing repo. But Azure DevOps does provide its own repository, which is Azure Repo. Now I'm going to copy this. So this is basically, this is the Git endpoint. Now in order to push your files to the Azure repo, you have to use this URL. This is the remote URL. So what I'm going to do now, I have some commandlets ready here. So what I can do first, here is my source code. Basically, these are the source code that I have. Okay, I'm going to publish this now. So for that, I'll have to add few command lines. Like I'm going to add, or I'm going to first initialize the directory. Then I'm going to add. Okay, I'm going to commit. So let's push this. As soon as I push this command, what happens is all the files that are exist in my local machine, that will get updated in the Azure repo. So let's go ahead here and just try to refresh, and you see all the files is updated here. This is basically coming from my local machine. Okay, so now what we are going to do, we are going to create a pipeline. So the pipeline, the whole purpose of pipeline is to create an automated build process. It helps us to automatically manage the build and deployment. So to create a pipeline, you have to select your source code. You have to say where is your source code exist. So in this case, my source code is exist on the Azure repo. So I'm selecting Azure repo. But in case if you have a source code sitting on the GitHub or Bitbucket or any other version control system, you can use this. But Azure DevOps does support multiple source control system. In this case, my code is exist on the Azure repo, and all I have to do is I'm going to select the repo that I have, and here there is a YAML file which is actually it's already built as part of this the initial development. But ideally, if you don't have a pipeline, you have to have a pipeline. The pipeline basically contains the series of steps that will be executed during the build process. So you have to just define what are the tasks that you are going to do. You have to come up with the pipeline. And also you will say from which branch it has to be triggered. Now I'm going to run this. So this process is going to take several minutes. Meanwhile, what we can do, we can create a release. So in the release process, what we do basically, we are integrating the Azure DevOps service with the actual deployment target, what you have. Now, as I said, I have deployment target. I have a staging environment, I have a production environment, and I have a Canary Release. So why I have multiple instances? It is because of the deployment pattern. So if you want to have a single endpoint, yes, you can have a single endpoint. But if you want to have a modern deployment patterns, that's where you start using the multiple services. And I'll talk about this deployment pattern shortly, the importance of deployment pattern and how this is going to adding value to the customers. Now, first, let's get an understanding how to create a pipeline. So I'm going to create a pipeline now. Okay. So this is app service deployment because my deployment target is the app service. So I'm going to select app service. Okay, so I'm going to name it as a staging. All right, so now here, all you have to do, just connect the deployment target. So you have to select your subscription. In this case, I'm going to select my subscription. I have several subscriptions, so it's taking some time to load. So this is my active subscription. Once this is authorized, it's going to taking a minute. And then you can select your app service name. So we are going to select the staging one. So because first, when you want to make a release, first is go and update it on the staging. And then you do some evaluations on the staging. Then it further pushed to the further stages like a Canary and production. So all I have to do is select the app service name. This is staging. And let's save this. So I just selected this. Okay. So now what we can do, if you go look at the pipeline, this is called pipeline. So you have just one environment. So now we wanted to clone this because we have multiple environment. We have multiple deployment targets, like let's say Canary and production. So I'm going to clone this. I'm going to name it as let's say Canary. I'm also going to clone this again, and I'm going to name it as a thing. Okay, just a second. Production. Okay, so here I'm gonna change this to production. Save this, and inside the production slot, I have something called deployment slots. So this I will talk something in shortly. Deployment slot basically it helps you to test your applications in a real time. So when we talk about the deployment pattern, we will have an idea. So if you have any question, just park it for a minute. Okay, so all you have to do here, what I'm saying is production application instance contains multiple slots. So I'm going to select the Canary slot. Now the production, I'm going to select the production slot. Yeah, it's production. All right. So now if you look at this, there is a staging, there is a canary, there is a production, which basically represents the deployment targets, which is staging, canary, production. And this canary, if you see, this is looking, it says it's a slot. So slot is basically it's a feature of app service. So app service have a feature called the deployment slot. So the deployment slot will help you to test your applications in a real time. So let's say you have a production instance. And if you look at this, 100% traffic is going to the production instance. Now imagine a scenario where you wanted to test this in a real time. So what you can do, you can create a deployment slot, and here you can route some partial traffic, let's say 10% of the traffic to this instance, and you can test your functionality. This is one of the great features that comes from the app service. So which can help you to build the deployment patterns. So let's go back and see if the build is completed. So let's save this. So basically, in this process, what's happening here is that behind the scene, Azure does provision something called build agent. And the build agent where the build job is executing. Basically, we have, there is a compile process that has to happen in order to push that package to the application, and that is what's happening. And behind the scene, there is a Linux machine, Ubuntu machine, where these build task is happening. As soon as the build task is completed, you will have an artifact, and that artifact you can connect to the pipeline. It actually performing some series of steps. So we can come back here probably another 2 minutes by the time the deployments will get completed. Then we will have to connect here in the releases, where we just have to connect the artifact. Okay, so now let's go back. So now let's go back and look at some of the key concepts like branching, pull request, and so on. So this is called pipeline. So pipeline helps you to automate the software deployment. Okay. So we will come back here because the build is in progress. We will come back after 5 minutes and have a look at it. Now let's talk about the source control. What is source control? So source control is the practice of tracking and managing the changes on your code. So let's imagine a scenario. You have a master branch. Now the master branch here in this scenario, this is the master branch. I mean, we just updated a source code into a repo, and this is considered as a master branch. Now imagine a scenario, you have hundreds of different developers working, and each developer is making a change on this master branch. Is it a good idea? Definitely no, because it's very difficult for you to see who has done changes on what files, right? So the branching basically, there is a concept called branching, and the branching basically helps developers to isolate the work in progress items from the completed work from your main branch. So let's say this is your main branch. Let's say I'm the developer, I am working on some feature release, and you are the developer, you are working on the bug fixing. So you can create your own branch, and I can create my own branch. I can just clone the directory from the master branch, then I do my work, and then once I complete the work, there is something called pull request, because my work has to be reviewed by the co-developers. So that is called pull request. Pull request basically, that's the collaboration process. So that's let other developers collaborate with you. They can review your code, and then finally you guys can agree on, okay, this code can be committed to the master branch. So once all the pull request is completed at this branches, then you can directly commit to the master branch. At that point in time, what happens, this changes and this changes will get merged. That is called pull request. Now the branch flow, how this works is, first as a developer, I can create my branch and then I make some changes. Then I perform the commit. Then I create a pull request. When I basically in the pull request, I am asking all the developers, hey, come and review the code. And then if everything is okay, we can commit it. Then you discuss your code, you review your code. Then you finally you do the merging process. Once you do the merge process, eventually the master branch gets updated. Now, as soon as the master branch gets updated, the deployment will automatically trigger. Now let's go back here and here let's add the artifact. But if you go and look at the pipeline, you should be seeing the task is completed. So now let's create a release and let's add the artifact. Now the artifact is developed. Let's go here, add an artifact. So here I am saying this is my artifact. Add, and now we wanted to enable the continuous deployment, which means whenever somebody make any changes on the master branch, that has to be updated. If you want to do any filtering, here you can do. Okay, now this is completed. The pipeline is completed. Now what all you have to do is just create this release. Let's create this release. So basically we are saying the staging, we know whenever there is any change happens, automatically there is a build who is going to happen, and that build is going to roll out to the different stages. First it comes to the staging, then it comes to the canary, then it comes to the production. This is called the pipeline. Now let's go ahead and create this pipeline. And now the actual release process has started. Now if you go back, now what happens is started. So once the deployment is complete, when you go back to your deployment target, let's say this is my deployment target, which is staging. And when I open this website now I see the blank vanilla page that's coming from the app services. But then once this deployment is complete, let's say once this deployment is complete, you will see the actual website. And then going forward, whenever you make any changes on your source control, that automatically this build process can happen. Now, in between, this pipeline will have an option, something called the pre-deployment condition and post-deployment condition. So pre-deployment conditions will help you to evaluate some signals. So let's say here there is something called deployment gate. In the deployment gate, let's say if you are saying something like Azure monitor alerts. So not here, I think it should be the best area should be post deployment. Let's say post deployment gate. So in the post deployment gate, for example, if I want to evaluate the health signal of the staging, I wanted to make sure the new build is not causing any problem on my applications. So what I can do, I can enable the deployment gates and I can say, okay, make sure my application is not impacted by this release. So what I can do, I have to do some configurations on the Azure Monitor side. So what it does is basically it's go and look at this application performance and see if there is any performance issue. Let's say if there is any latency issue or any utilizations issue. If so, then Azure Monitor automatically trigger an alert. Of course, you have to configure the Azure Monitor alerting. So what's happening here is if Azure Monitor creates any alerts, then this deployment will not go through further. The deployment gets stopped here. It doesn't move here. And also, if you want any approvals, let's say pre-deployment approval or post-deployment approval, you may activate the post-deployment approval. See, for example, here, you can use the pre-deployment approval in a way that, let's imagine a scenario, you have a source code, which is in the repo. Now, you wanted to make sure the source code doesn't have any vulnerabilities. Let's say you have to do some static code analysis. How do you do that? So you can integrate some plugins, which we will discuss later. So before this deployment moved to the staging, you wanted to make sure you are evaluating the vulnerability checks. So you can put up pre-deployment conditions where you can set some approval procedures. So this is the way you can use the pre-deployment conditions and the post-deployment conditions. All right, so now let's see. Yeah, I see here the deployment is completed on the staging. Now, if I go back and let's refresh this, you will see the applications deployed here. Okay, I think it's still standing up. Yeah. Yeah, you see this is my retail test demo applications, and I see my application is pushed. Now let's say if I want to make a change, let's say there is a bug or there is any new release, or maybe I wanted to make some changes. All I have to do, I can from my local machine, from my machine, I can clone this repo. I can just do the necessary editing on my VS Code, and then I can make a direct commit from the local machine. As soon as I make a commit, this will create a new build process, and then the new build get released to the production. This cycle will continue. The cycle will continue. So this is called continuous integration and continuous deployment. In case if you have any questions, just feel free to pass it in the chat window. All right. Now this is going on Canary and production, and in between wherever required, if you want to incorporate any processes, you can do it on these stages. All right. Now let's talk about the deployment patterns. What is deployment pattern? So traditionally, if you look at your software deployment, we used to have a environment something like this: development, staging, testing, staging, production. Now let's say if I want to make a release, and the release may take 2 to 3 weeks to reach to the production, because first we deploy it in the development, then we take two weeks time to test it, then we go to the testing, then staging, then production. So to release a feature, it takes a lot of time. By the time we will have to release another features. So because the system is moving very fast and business wants to stay ahead of competitor, this model doesn't work in a right way, or this model doesn't give the better business results. So there is a requirement for the modern deployment patterns. So modern deployment patterns basically helps us to speed up the software delivery. Now there are several deployment patterns. Let's say blue-green deployment, Canary Release, A/B testing, dark launching, progressive exposure. So these are several deployment patterns which are available. Now depends on your scenario, you can use these deployment patterns, and we will see in a high level. So let's talk about blue-green deployment. In the blue-green deployment, what happens is basically we redirect some traffic to the green instance. Let's say your blue instance is the old feature or legacy feature, and you have released a new feature. The new feature, basically what you do, you have a deployment slots. So I just showed you here this feature. The app service have something called deployment slots. You can make use of this deployment slots, and you can do some traffic routing. And here you have an option. Let's say you make a new release, let's say version 1.0 on the green, and you test the functionality. If everything looks good, you can increase the traffic. All you can do is just you can increase the traffic. You can increase the traffic, which is actually not here, maybe here in the production. You can increase the traffic and you can switch back, you can swap. But if you feel some issues, you can immediately swap. If you feel some issues after you doing the bulk approach, you have an option to revert. So you can swap anytime, you can reduce the traffic, increase the traffic. So this will give you the flexibility to test your applications in a real time. That is blue-green deployment. Now Canary Release again, it's very similar to blue-green deployment, but then here what we do here is that here we collect some feedback data from the applications. Now what is feedback? So the feedback is the mechanism that we use in the DevOps to continuously improve the application performance or efficiency. So we constantly receive the feedbacks from the applications, we constantly receive the feedbacks from the users, customers, and see if we can improve. So the idea is the Canary release, we just release the new features to the small subset of users and collects the feedbacks. And then those feedbacks will be again incorporated into the whole development cycle. And then we come up with a new release. So this is the purpose of the Canary release. Now there is something called A/B testing. This is one of the useful experiment scenario. You might use this pattern in some scenarios. So let's imagine a scenario. You are planning to launch a new application, and you have two variant application A and option A and option B. So option A having some different UI experience, and option B is having some different UI experience. Now you wanted to know, or you wanted to determine which variant performs better. So what you can do, you have two variants. One is option A and option B, which is called A/B testing. And 50% of the traffic you route it to the option A, and another 50% of the user traffic will be redirected to the option B. And then you collect the feedback from the applications using the help of application insights, and also from the feedbacks from the users, and see, then evaluate which one is doing better, option A or option B. Then eventually you can decide, okay, let's go ahead with the option B for the final release. So that is called A/B testing. And also there is something called dark launching. Dark launching, basically, here we talked about the multiple app services, like let's say, just a second. So we saw staging, productions, and Canary. Now in this, so far what we have discussed, okay, staging will have a version 1.0. The productions will have a version 0.9. Now, there is incremental changes. So here, this dark launching, what happens is your application service, the app service itself, that supports multiple versions, version 1 and version 2. But the downside here is your apps has to be developed. Basically, your developer has to build these capabilities on the application code, as part of the initial configurations. And then you can make use of some features like a feature toggle, where you can activate, you can activate when you wants to activate 1.0, you can deactivate when you wants to do that 2.0. So you can control this toggle switch whenever you want. So the app service platform will give you the flexibility. Using this, you can activate the dark launching options. So dark launching option, basically, end user don't even know that there is a change is going to happen. It's like you decide, suddenly you activate, you gather the performance, and you take that for the further corrective actions. So that is the dark launching options. So these are some of the deployment patterns that you can consider, because as we all know, the traditional deployment pattern have some challenges, especially on the time limit. We can't take 3 weeks time to release some productions to the release some features to the production. So in order to release the new releases to the productions instantly, but at the same time your end users also should not be impacted. So these deployment patterns will give you an ability to achieve the deployment goals. All right. So any questions so far? If you have any questions, just feel free to update your questions. Okay. Now let's talk about the feedback. So we all know there are multiple stages, let's say planning, code, build, test, release, and monitor. Now, when it comes to feedback, why we should have an understanding why we are collecting the feedback. We are collecting the feedback to improve the applications. So the whole purpose of DevOps practice is, one of the key encouragement is that learn from the failure. Let's say, if something failed, you learn from the failure and see how we can avoid that problems. So the continuous learning is one of the key transformation in this DevOps transformations. So we have to constantly monitor your applications, seek the feedbacks from various perspectives. You can take the feedback from the developers, you can take the feedback from the peoples, you can take the feedback from the applications, and then you incorporate to the planning again, and then you optimize the code. So you keep optimizing the code. For example, you make a build, let's say if the developer identified some bugs in the build process, then the developer has to provide the feedback back to the team, and then the team has to rework, and then they will create a new build. The new build might pass the coding stage, and then again, if you wants to collect some feedback, let's say from the people, there are some additional plugins. Let's say there are some Twitter sentiment analysis, there are some surveys which you can use to collect the feedback from the people. So basically, you wanted to know how people think about your application. So that's the kind of feedbacks that you are receiving from the peoples. And now finally you collect the feedback from the applications. So let's say you have a monitoring tools like application insights. So application insights constantly monitor your application behavior in terms of CPU utilization, memory utilization, the HTTP queue length, and the runtime exception. It collects all the parameters, all the metrics and logs, and it can automatically provide the feedbacks back to the Azure boards. See, for example, um, uh, the Azure services are well integrated to receive the telemetry data from one another. Let's imagine app service. So app service is the deployment target. Now we have a monitoring solution, which is Azure Monitor and the application insights. Now the app insights can integrate to the app service, and app insights can gather the data from the app service, and then also app insights can connect to the DevOps. So if there is any latency issue, App Insights can take the latency issue and immediately it can notify the DevOps through the DevOps board. So I'll just quickly show you the DevOps board. For example, there are many ways to submit the feedbacks. So for example, here there is something called board. Now, as of board, basically, it give you the ability to manage your work item. The work item can be bug, or work item can be issue, task, anything. So I'll show you some demo board, which I have some data. So just a second. So if you look at this board, it's something similar to this. Your team can manage their work item. You can see what are the tasks that are assigned to these peoples, and it's like it's acting as a project management dashboard, like a Kanban board, where a team can manage their work item. So and also the project lead, they can look at this, what are the tasks assigned to this. And here what you are seeing here, let's say this is some issue. These issues can be automatically populated. So let's imagine App Insights is collecting the data from the web app. Now, if there is any latency is detected, you can configure a automation such a way that inside the application insights, which can automatically publish these items. This is called work items. It can automatically publish, let's say, bug or whatever you can name it. And this can be assigned to this. And developer can then take that findings, and then they can continuously work on the improvement. You can also submit the feedback from the feedback extensions. There are some feedback extensions available. Instantly, developers can submit the feedback, and this can instantly connect this to the Azure board. So you will have a complete visibility of what is happening in your environment. So these are some of the great things that you can do by using the feedback. So the whole purpose of feedback is to continuously analyze the telemetry logs, and you can keep optimizing your environment. So using these tool sets like Azure App Services, DevOps, Application Insights, you actually can create a digital feedback loop. So all our products are well integrated with one another to send the telemetry data. So using this, you can create a feedback loop. You can continuously capture the data, and you can make a meaningful information from the data that you have collected, and you can keep that information to optimize your applications and increase the business opportunities. All right. So now let's talk about the security, how we can incorporate security inside your DevOps, which is called DevSecOps or rugged DevOps. Now we all know what is DevOps now. So DevOps is basically it's a union of people, process, and technology to enable the continuous delivery of value for your end users. Now we all know there are series of stages: planning, code, build, test, release, and so on. And these are the tools: Azure Board, Repo, pipelines, test plans, artifacts can be used to support you on the respective places. Now, how do we look at the security and what are the components that you have to incorporate? Now, when it comes to security, for example, you might want to do some vulnerability checks on your source code. So let's imagine you have a source code and you wanted to make sure this source code is inspected before it creates any build. So you might want to do some vulnerability checks. And also you wanted to make sure the source code doesn't have any open source dependencies, the source code doesn't have any licensing issues. You might want to integrate some components at this stage because you don't want to make a build unless you verify these parameters. At the same time, there are some other things that you can do using the deployment gates. Let's say you make a build. Now you wanted to make sure the build is comply with the policies what are defined in the Azure. You wanted to make sure that the build is not causing any performance issue. So you might use the deployment gate, Azure Monitor, and so on the post deployment scenarios. Basically, the deployment gate help you to evaluate the health signal before it process. And also when it comes to testing, you might wanted to test some load testing or penetration testing, and eventually you also wanted to have a application insights configured to get the right telemetry data, to get the right performance data, to make sure your application is not impacted. So these are some of the points that you can integrate into your DevOps practice. Now, how do we do that? There are several extensions available. In fact, if you look at the Azure DevOps, there is something called marketplace.visualstudio.com, where you have a series of extensions, and there are hundreds of thousands of different extensions available. You can pick the respective extensions. There are some extensions might be free, and there are some extensions might be you have to pay. So for example, in order to evaluate your source codes, there are some commonly used extensions like a white source bolt, Veracode, Sonar Cube, checkmarks, Black Duck, and they all good in some perspective. There are some codes might be working fine for let's say Java application, and there are some tools might be perfect fit for the .NET application. So it really depends on exactly what you want to achieve, and you can pick the respective plugins from the marketplace. It's very easy to integrate. So all you have to do is let's imagine if I'm going to use white source bolt, all I have to do is I just have to search, and then I can install the plugin from here. I can install the plugin from here. As soon as I install this, my DevOps here, I will have a integration, something like white source bolt. And what we can do here, we can activate a pre-deployment condition. We can set some approval. The approver has to go and evaluate the white source bolt report. It automatically look at the scanning and it publish the scanning results. And then I don't have the license, so it is not active. But yeah, it will give a complete report, and you can just one console, you can see if you have any vulnerabilities issues on the source code, or if you have any let's say licensing issue. Everything can be seen in the single console. Okay. Now, this is just it's not only specific to DevOps, but also it's complete Azure. How Azure look at the security. So we always say security is the layered approach. So we should think the security from the multiple layers. Let's say you should think about the security from the identity. You should think about the security from the network, platform, applications, data, governance. Now each layers, Microsoft is offering several features. Let's say if you want to protect your identity, features like identity protection, managed identity, privileged identity, access management, role-based access control. So these are some of the key features that you should incorporate into the identity layer. Now, when it comes to network, make sure you have the DDoS protection. Make sure you use the service endpoints on private link wherever required, in order to isolate the networking connections. And when it comes to data, let's say If you want to store some encryption keys, make sure you use the services like a key vault to securely store your key. And when it comes to governance, make sure you have the right Azure policy. Even these policies can be integrated into the Azure DevOps. Even you can say that in the deployment gate, you can activate the Azure policy evaluation. So make sure whatever you deploy, it has to inline with the Azure policy. Policy is basically set of instructions or set of standards which you can define on the subscription level. Now, some of the best practices: you always protect your secrets, and if possible, you use role-based access control wherever possible instead of secrets. Because in role-based access control, you don't have to exchange any keys. Instead, the role is assigned on the identity role. I know Azure AD take care of this. And you make sure you implement multi-factor authentication, privileged identity management, just in-time access, just enough administration. So do not give a full access. Let's say if your project member just need a certain access, you just limit them, just enough administration. Do not give a complete access. Now, implement static code analysis and dynamic code analysis. Yeah, as we discussed, there are multiple extensions available. You can incorporate these tools into the Azure DevOps, and which can give you the complete report of the static code analysis and the dynamic code analysis. Now, leverage Azure Security Center. So Azure have a built-in security center. You can just access this from here, a security center. Now, the security center is basically acting as a posture management. Let's say you have some resources in the Azure. It detects if there is any vulnerabilities exist in your resources, and it can give you the recommendations. So you can always look at this Azure Security Center recommendations. It will list out all the vulnerabilities. Let's say I have an app service which we just deployed, and if there is any vulnerabilities exist in my app service, and that's going to tell me here, okay, your app service endpoint is exposed, maybe you have to limit it, something like that. You get an clear recommendations, and also you get the action, what you can do in order to fix that particular issue. You have a remediation steps as well provided by the Azure Security Center. And leverage Azure ATP. ATP is the threat protections. In fact, Azure Security Center does have the Defender on. There is a component. As long as you have a license to the Defender on, you can leverage the threat protections. Let's say you have a Kubernetes cluster, you have a web services, you have a SQL database. As long as you have a threat protections, and that threat protections can detect your all, you look at your all applications or all the services that you have and see if there is any threat exist in the your services. And finally, there are some of the key points to remember. So DevOps is all about continuous integrations and continuous delivery. And you always look for continuous improvement. That's why we are collecting the feedback. Make sure we are collecting the feedback from every possible stages, let's say from you developers, from the end users, from the applications. Look for an improvement, keep on optimizing the infrastructure, so you get a better opportunities and better results. Now, in the DevOps delivery process, everyone is responsible on the delivery process, and but everyone will have a different task. So series of stages: plan, code, build, test. So you might have some team responsible for the testing, some team responsible for the operations. So you have to define a clear workflow, and you have to make them responsible for the respective areas, and keep everything in the version control. So version control, Azure Repo does provide the version control system. Make sure you build the right strategy, branching strategy, pull request, how you are going to create a branching strategy. Because when we, on the pipeline, we don't want the commit happens from the multiple branches, right? So we can explicitly filter, make sure whenever there is any commit happens on the master branch, then only the deployment should trigger. So you have to have the right set of policies, and you can automate almost everything. In fact, in the DevOps, it will let you do customize the pipeline. So let's say if you go back to the pipeline, you can add series of tasks. For example, let's say here, let's So let's go releases. Now I have a release here. Now you can add multiple tasks to automate certain things. For example, let's say edit release or edit pipeline. So if I want to add additional task, let's say if I wanted to do some testing, I wanted to publish some test results. So I can in fact add additional task. It have series of tasks exist. You can perform a test, you can publish the test results. So the DevOps is basically, it's a platform that give you the ability to completely automate everything that you wanted to achieve. So automate everything as much as possible. If it hurts, do it more frequently, which means failure is always expected. So we are here to learn from the failures. So if it is failed, because the deployment patterns, these arrangements actually help us from the failure. The risk is very limited because you have an opportunity to reduce the traffic and do the testing, slowly increase the traffic. You have a lot of opportunities. So if it hurts, do it more frequently so you get mature on the overall processes. And done means it is just released. So you have to get ready for the next release. And finally, this is very important in the DevOps transformation, which is build quality in. As we know, the technology is been continuously transforming, the products are continuously evolving. So you have to pay attention on the skilling. Skilling is one of the important portion as part of this transformation. So you have to pay attention on the skilling. Make sure your team have the right skill sets on the respective products that you are using. So you might use like hundreds of different products, but make sure your team have an understanding on all the different products that you are using as part of this DevOps transformations. So that's all about the today's presentation. So let's summarize what we have discussed. So initially we discussed about the importance of DevOps transformations, and we saw the overview of DevOps transformation. We saw what is board, pipeline, repo, artifacts. Then we talked about managing source control. We talked about managing the pipelines. Then we also look at the importance of deployment patterns and how you can plan for the deployment patterns. And then finally, we talked about the security in DevOps, how you can incorporate the security elements into the DevOps practice. So with that being said, I like to invite the questions if you have any. So we can now have it as an interactive discussion if you have any open questions. So I kept the last 30 minutes for the Q&A. So I'm happy to accept any questions if you have. So Vinayak, do we have any questions?
Yeah, Anthony, can you hear me all right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I don't have any questions. So just wanted to, I just posted on the chat as well. So if you have any questions, please post them on the chat, whatever, regarding the product, regarding the deployment pattern, regarding any of the source code, techniques that we talked about, control techniques that we talked about. And, Anthony and me can answer any questions if you have. So we'll wait for a couple of minutes. I don't see any questions as of now. But yeah, if there are any questions, we'll just wait for a couple of minutes so the questions can come in. We've also pushed out a poll about the usefulness of the webinar, and if you have any feedback, so that we can actually improve our webinars as we go forward. So you can actually fill in the poll also, and you can post on the. So I'm just posting on the chat as well. So if you have any questions, please do bring them forward about any of the things that we have talked so far. Cool. I think while we wait for questions, I had I had a couple of questions from my side as well. So, Anthony, since you talk to a bunch of people who are using Azure Dev, what are the common kind of anti-patterns that you have seen in deployment? Like some common mistakes that people make.
Okay, so so the uh, first of all, the common mistakes that people make is, I would say, a lack of understanding. So we should have an understanding of the whole ecosystem. So because it's not only about the one, it's not specific to one product. It is actually specific to the entire cultural changes, the mindset changes. Now we have to drive it in slightly bigger level, because you might have a team. Now when you adopt the DevOps practice, what happens is, you have to plan for your resource transformation, which is very important, because if you don't do the resource transformation, then you have existing line of the BAU task, business as usual task, which is going to suffer. So you have to carefully plan this transformation, because when you pull the resource from the existing task, um, how you are going to balance that. That's actually, people management is very important in this transformation journey. And also acquiring the right tool sets. Let's say,
No, that's quite interesting because there's so many things that can be integrated to Azure DevOps, right? So choosing the right kind of tools and making sure they're integrated well, because
yeah,
otherwise I think you will
yeah,
spend a lot of time, debugging
correct.
your pipelines and other things rather than that helping you. So
Yeah.
it can work the other way. So you have a
So
few questions coming in as well. Ayman Ismail asks, how do developers in a team change from just shipping code to also help monitor, react, and feedback after deployments?
yeah, so ideally what we advise, you start from small and then keep expanding, right? So you have to have a holistic vision, and uh, see, it's like, when you cannot just switch from, if you are doing task A, you cannot just switch from task A to the DevOps practice. So there is a transformation path that you have to define, and slowly you have to transform. It's not like just overnight you all follow the DevOps practice, unless if it is the cloud born company where you are completely rebuilding everything using cloud native. Because we have, as of now, the common challenges is, most of our existing application ecosystem, it's heavily relying on the monolith model, or the we
Right.
heavily using on the virtual machine architecture, where we really can't directly adopt the DevOps. The DevOps makes more sense when you start moving your applications towards the cloud native architecture or the modern architecture. That's where you can get a great benefits. So I would say, you start with assessment, see what you can transform. Let's say you may have 100 application, not necessarily you can bring everything into the one DevOps transformation at one point. You have to slowly transform which are the applications you can first adopt, or probably the it's suitable for the, it's more suitable for the greenfield. There are two things are there: greenfield deployment and brownfield deployment. So for greenfield deployment, yes, you can make a clear plan, and you
So
can build the,
yeah, so basically you build with like DevOps in mind, and the attitude.
yeah,
I mean, then the attitude of the team can change. I think with brownfield it's a little tricky, right? Because
it's
you
little
already
tricky,
have things,
because
and then yeah, and then
it,
you have to change both the mindset and also the underlying way in which maybe deployments are done as well.
yeah, if
Does
you
take
are
a bit of effort, right?
right, if you are transforming from the brownfield, which means you have to have a, first of all, cultural changes, the mindset changes has to happen, and then you slowly plan for the transformation.
Transition, yeah. Cool. So one more question has come in from Santosh Kumar M. He's asking what is support for containers in Azure DevOps?
Yeah, we have
You
a
just talked
great
about VMs. So yeah, I think
support.
he wanted to talk about containers as well. Yeah.
Yeah, when we build the pipeline, we selected deploy app service. Similarly, you will see the task for the containers. You will see the task for the Kubernetes. In fact, Azure DevOps have the collection of supported mechanisms. We do completely support the DevOps containers Kubernetes ecosystem.
Cool. I think that's about it. I mean, I'm just waiting for a couple of seconds for any other questions. If not, what we can do is, this, by the way, I mean, if any of your colleagues want to see this presentation or you want to go through this again, this should be available on demand I'll just paste the link. So the same page where you actually registered, they can also register and actually attend the webinars as well. So I'll paste the link again. Because often we have people attending and then they want their colleagues also to attend, or you see that, so you can definitely do that. So I'm just pasting the link. So it is aka.ms/highwayweb, and you should see it in your console as well. Cool. I think that's all. I think in terms of the questions that we have got, and we have just posted the link to the webinar, yeah, we will see you at the next iteration in May for the next topic that we have in Azure DevOps. Any final words, Anthony, before we stop for the webinar?
No, I'm good. So yeah, as we discussed, yeah, this video will be on demand available. So definitely they can reach out, and if they have any questions, just feel free to reach out to us, and we can happy to support anytime.
Sure. Thank you so much, everyone, and we hope to see you in the next edition of Startup Thursdays, and and hope you enjoyed this as well. Thank you so much. Bye. Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.